Let's look at our first word problem. The hypotenuse of a right triangle is 30 meters in length. One leg is 6 meters shorter than the other leg. Find the length of each leg. Now that we've familiarized ourselves with the problem, let's try to do it. Now, what are the facts that we gathered? First of all, we know the hypotenuse of our right triangle has length 30 meters. Secondly, we know that the relationship between the legs is that one leg is 6 meters shorter than that other leg. When approaching a problem that involves a geometric figure, it's probably best to sketch a little diagram so we can visualize exactly what's going on. So in this problem, let's draw a right triangle. Remember, a right triangle is a triangle with exactly one right angle. We know the hypotenuse, which is the longest length, or the longest side, has length 30. And we know that the relationship between the two legs is that one is 6 meters shorter than the other. So in other words, if this leg is x, which looks a little bit longer by diagram, we know the other leg is 6 meters shorter than that, or in this case, that's x minus 6. Well, thank goodness for the Pythagorean theorem, because if you'll recall, the Pythagorean theorem tells us the length of the hypotenuse squared is equal to the sum of the lengths of the legs squared. Or writing that as an equation, we'll get 30 squared, which is the hypotenuse, is equal to this leg squared, which is x minus 6 squared, plus the other leg squared, which in that case is x squared. What we've done then is we've created for ourselves a quadratic formula which we now need to solve. Since I see this binomial being squared, we're going to have to multiply that out. So this gives me 300 squared, or 900, is equal to, now remember, what this represents is x minus 6 times x minus 6. Hopefully you practice this enough so that you can FOIL in your head and write the results right here. That will be very helpful before you go on to your next class. So practice that if you haven't yet mastered it. So x minus 6 times x minus 6 is x squared minus 12x plus 36. This here is x minus 6 quantity squared. The biggest mistake that most students make in this particular portion of the problem is they forget to OI in FOIL, and they usually write just x squared minus 36 or x squared plus 36 there. Don't be one of those. Remember, when you multiply two binomials, you have to FOIL. Do not leave out that middle term. Okay, let's continue. So this trinomial is the result of this binomial squared, and then we're going to add x squared at the end. Now that we've done that, let's collect like terms. I've got 900 is equal to, on the right-hand side, I've got x squared plus x squared, 2x squared. And now what I'm going to do is write this in descending order. Remember, descending order is writing the variables from the highest power down to the lowest power. So my next power, I've used these x squares. I have a negative 12x. And then finally, I have a plus 36 there at the end. Now, in order to solve a quadratic equation, we like to write it in standard form. Standard form says that one of the sides of my equation is equal to 0. We're almost there. All you have to do is get rid of that 900. To get rid of that 900, subtract it from both sides of the equation. When we do, we get 0 equals 2x squared minus 12x. When we subtract 900 from both sides, we're going to get a negative number, negative 864. Now our job is to factor this we can factor this quadratic equation, or we could choose to use a quadratic formula. The choice is up to you. Some students enjoy the quadratic formula so much that no matter what kind of quadratic equation they get, they go ahead and use a quadratic formula, which is fine. But for me, I think I can factor this one, and I believe that factoring is just a little faster than using that quadratic formula. So I'm going to try to factor this equation. Now, before I factor this, since the numbers are just a little bit large, especially here at the end, I noticed one thing. I noticed that each of these coefficients and this constant term here are divisible by 2. So before I begin my factoring process, I'm going to divide both sides of this equation by the number 2. Now on this left-hand side, 0 divided by 2 is simply 0, equals 2x squared divided by 2. I get that nice x squared. That's just what I like. I love it when that leading coefficient is the number 1. Minus 12 divided by 2, 6x. And finally, way down here at the end, I have 864 divided by 2, or 432. So there we have it. Now you may not be feeling all that comfortable with these numbers, but you could take your little calculator and play around with some products. When you do, you'll find out that this does indeed factor. Now I'll confess to you that it took me a little bit of time to find these numbers, but I found out that positive 18 times a negative 24 have a product of negative 432, and it's easy to see that their sum adds up to negative 6. So indeed, this number is factorable. Now that I have the product of two numbers that's equal to 0, are you getting a headache? We're using everything that we learned in this book. We can apply the zero factor property. Do you remember that? That tells me that if I have two numbers whose product is 0, then either this one is 0 or the other one is 0. So I get either x plus 18 equals 0, or my other choice is x minus 24 equals 0. I'm sure you're feeling confident now, because your job to finish this problem is to solve both of these equations for x. In this first one, x is equal to negative 18. In the second one, I hope you can see very easily that x is equal to positive 24. Now, don't just stop. Don't be overzealous here. Remember, the goal of solving these word problems is to always answer the question that was asked. Let's think back. What was asked of us in this particular problem? Well, if you'll recall, we were given that the length of this hypotenuse in the right triangle was 30. We did not know the lengths of the other two legs. That was our job, find the length of the legs. Now, one of our possibilities is x equals negative 18. Now, think about it. Can we have a leg with length negative 18? That's impossible. So we'll eliminate this possibility. Can we have x equals 24? Well, that looks okay at this point. So we're going to keep this solution. And again, don't stop now because we're almost done. We have to answer the question which asks us to find the length of both our legs. Now, one of our legs has length 24. That's going to be this one right here. The other one has length x minus 6. And since 24 is our value for x there, 24 minus 6 gives us 18. So remember, always answer the question asked. In this case, we can say the legs have lengths. And after all this work, we're happy to say the legs have length of 18 meters and 24 meters. Now that was an exhausting problem, wasn't it? But if you take it slowly, draw a diagram if it's possible. Write the relationship. In this case, we had a special formula, the Pythagorean theorem. Solve the quadratic equation. Now again, it's your choice. If you thought it was too difficult to factor and find two numbers that have a product of negative 432 and a sum of negative 6, if you hate factoring, don't do it. You, at this point, could incorporate the use of the quadratic formula. That's fine. But like I said, I personally believe in this particular problem, just playing around with my calculator a little bit, I was able to find those numbers. It didn't take me too long. And then it shortens my problem a bit. Make sure that after all this work, you don't just jump in and give a solution. Make sure you look at your two solutions. Make sure that you answer the question asked. Eliminate those solutions that make no sense, and then write your solution in the form of a sentence.